Have you ever walked into a room and instantly noticed that one picture frame is slightly crooked? Not dramatically crooked. Not falling off the wall. Just off. And suddenly, you can't unsee it. Everyone else is laughing, talking, completely unaware. But your brain? Your brain is screaming, fix it. Or maybe you're the person who remembers that someone changed their tone for half a second in a conversation 3 days ago. You noticed the pause. The micro-expression. The tiny shift in energy. And while everyone else moved on, you're still thinking about it. If that's you, you might have wondered, why do I notice things other people don't? Why can't I just let the small stuff go? Most people assume that noticing tiny details means you're picky. Or anxious. Or overthinking. But the psychological reality is much deeper, and much more fascinating. Because people who notice tiny details aren't just being extra. Their brains are literally wired to process the world differently. Let me show you what's really going on. Imagine 2 people walking through a forest. One sees a forest. Trees, greenery, sunlight. The other sees the slight bend in a branch, the different shades of green between leaves, the faint sound of water somewhere in the distance. Same forest. Different perception. Psychologists call this difference in attentional style. Some people have what's known as global processing, they see the big picture first. Others lean toward local processing. They zoom in on the parts before the whole. If you're someone who notices tiny details, your brain naturally zooms in. And here's the thing, it's not random. Your brain is constantly filtering billions of bits of information every second. It has to decide what's important and what to ignore. For some people, the filter is broad and blurry. For others, it's sharp and precise, like a high-resolution camera lens. You're not trying to notice the small stuff. Your brain simply flags it as important. This trait is often linked to higher levels of trait conscientiousness and sometimes heightened sensory sensitivity. Research on highly sensitive individuals shows that their nervous systems process stimuli more deeply. It's not just that they see more. They process more. That tiny scratch on the table? Your brain doesn't just register it visually. It analyzes it. Where did it come from? Was it there before? Does it change the symmetry of the room? It sounds exhausting, doesn't it? And sometimes it is. But here's where it gets interesting. People who notice tiny details often develop incredible pattern recognition abilities. Your brain is like a detective constantly collecting small clues. You notice inconsistencies in stories. You pick up on subtle emotional shifts. You sense when something is off long before it becomes obvious. Think about great detectives in fiction. Sherlock Holmes doesn't solve cases by staring at the skyline. He notices the mud on the shoe. The misplaced hat. The almost invisible detail. In real life, your attention to detail can make you excellent at certain tasks, editing, design, research, strategy, even relationships. You remember what someone said months ago. You notice when they change their hairstyle or when their smile looks forced. You see the nuance. But there's a shadow side to this gift. When your brain is tuned to small signals, it can also magnify them. A short text reply becomes a potential sign of rejection. A tiny mistake becomes a giant flaw in your mind. That slightly crooked picture frame? It can feel like chaos. Why does this happen? Because your brain is not just a detail detector. It's a prediction machine. Neuroscience tells us that the brain constantly tries to predict what will happen next based on past patterns. The more details you collect, the more data your brain uses to build predictions. And sometimes, it overcorrects. In evolutionary terms, this kind of hyper-awareness could have been protective. Noticing the slight rustle in the bushes could mean survival. Detecting subtle social cues could mean staying in the group. But in modern life, it can feel like your brain is running on high-definition mode while everyone else is in standard definition. Have you ever felt slightly out of sync because of it? Like you're reacting to things other people didn't even notice? There's also a strong emotional component here. People who notice tiny details often have high levels of empathy. Emotional intelligence isn't just about understanding feelings, it's about detecting them. The slight change in posture. The quick glance away. The half-second delay before someone answers. Your brain picks up micro-expressions, tiny facial movements that last less than a second. Studies in psychology show that many of these expressions happen unconsciously. Most people miss them. You don't. And that can make you incredibly perceptive. But it can also make you overwhelmed. Because if you notice every crack in the system, every tension in the room, every subtle disappointment in someone's voice, your nervous system rarely gets a break. It's like having your emotional radar permanently switched on. Some people cope by trying to shut it down. They tell themselves, "I'm overthinking. It's not that deep." And sometimes, yes, the mind does create stories from incomplete information. But dismissing your perception entirely can feel like gaslighting yourself. The key isn't to stop noticing details. It's to understand what to do with them. Let's go back to that crooked picture frame. There are two possibilities. 1, you notice it, smile internally, and move on. 2, you fixate on it until it consumes your attention. The difference isn't perception. It's regulation. Your brain may highlight details automatically, but you have agency over how much weight you give them. People who notice tiny details often. Perfectionism isn't always about ego. Often, it's about control. When you notice everything, imperfection stands out like a flashing neon sign. Fixing it feels calming. But here's the paradox, the world is full of tiny imperfections. If you try to fix them all, you'll be exhausted. So what's the deeper psychological shift? It's realizing that your detail-oriented mind is a tool, not a tyrant. Think of your attention like a spotlight. You can't turn it off completely, but you can choose where to point it. Instead of focusing only on flaws, you can train it to notice beauty with the same intensity. The slight warmth in someone's smile. The precise shade of orange in a sunset. The subtle humor in a friend's comment. If your brain is wired to see the small things, you can decide which small things deserve your focus. There's also something quietly powerful about people who notice tiny details. They often see what others overlook, not just problems, but possibilities. In art, in relationships, in ideas. Some of the greatest innovators and creators in history were obsessive about details. Think about the way certain directors obsess over lighting in a single scene. Or how master craftsmen spend hours refining something no one else would notice. Those tiny details create depth. And depth is your natural language. You experience the world in layers. You don't skim. You dive. That might mean you feel more. Think more. Reflect more. And yes, sometimes worry more. But it also means you live with a richness that many people miss. The real growth comes when you stop seeing this trait as a flaw and start seeing it as a sensitivity that needs balance. You're not too much. Your brain just processes more. And maybe the reason you notice the crooked picture frame isn't because you're difficult. Maybe it's because you care about harmony. Maybe the reason you replay conversations isn't because you're weak. Maybe it's because you value connection deeply. So the next time you catch a tiny detail that no one else seems to see, pause. Instead of criticizing yourself, get curious. What is this detail telling me? Is it useful? Or is my brain just doing what it does best, scanning? You don't have to dull your perception to fit in. You just need to build trust in yourself. Trust that you can notice without spiraling. Observe without judging. See without carrying everything. Because in a world that often rushes past nuance, people like you slow it down. You bring awareness. You catch the quiet signals. You sense the subtle shifts. And that's not a weakness. That's a form of intelligence. So maybe the real question isn't, why do I notice tiny details? Maybe it's, how can I use this gift wisely? If this sounds like you, I'd love to know, what's one tiny detail you always notice that others miss? And how has it shaped your life? Because sometimes, the smallest details reveal the biggest truths.